Just a second, just setting up my stuff. Okay. Great. So I guess all of us wonder, what is this motion about? So I think it's all about displaying, like inviting veterans to the school to display and tell war stories and missions they went in. Then it also talks about celebrating the Army Day part of school and having kids dressed up like the US Army in order to pretend that they are celebrating an event. Probably it's about trips to the local military base, where military people are just coming with hammers and then taking the kids in order to see how like the military looks like in action, right? Probably this is not about changing the curricula and talking about wars. Probably that's still going to happen. In the conversation about the War of Independence is still going to happen because that's going to be delivered by our history teacher. And then probably access to information is going to be equal in both places. It's just this insertion of the military personnel doing actions that probably promote the activity the activity of the military, like the soldiers in real life. Okay, why do we want to do this? Mainly because we want to demilitarize the brains of the future generations. We want to give the people the option to believe in whatever they want to believe. And then the second thing is, if this succeeds, and there are two paths to history, if we are lucky enough to convince people, then probably are going to have less wars and less willingness to support and attribute resources to wars, which probably leads to less chaos on the global scene, considering what US is currently and has been doing in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and so on and so forth. So what is school and what is its role? It's a mechanism of the society, of the state, to build equipped citizens to operate in real world. It has a functional perspective. It teaches you skills. For example, how the democracy works and the fact that you need to vote for individuals in order to represent you in the system. It teaches you about the systems in which you operate. For example, it teaches you about how money operates and how history evolved throughout time, so that you can understand why people behave in a certain way and what needs there are. It teaches you about career, and it builds you the skills that you need in order to develop a career. That's why, for example, you learn math or you learn computer science, so you can become someone that can earn money. What it never does, it doesn't provide dogmatism. It doesn't teach dogmatism. That's why we don't teach religion, politics, or army-related stuff in school, because all of these things require consent. Furthermore, more important than religion and politics, the involvement on army pushes individuals by glorifying the activity and inspiring kids by doing quirky stuff like riding a cool hammer and talking with that amazing person who survived the bomb explosion, into selling them worse and being an army and a soldier person. And this is extremely different than being a politician or a religion, which you already deny access to, because it gets you in a position where you get yourself killed, right? It's a moment where you need to sacrifice the most fundamental thing that you have, your life, for the fate of your country. We believe giving your life is the most precious things you can have, and we should push this as late as possible in the process, right? That's why we don't want to build a mindset for these kids so early in the process. And even if we accept that there needs to be a choice when you are 18 or 16 years old to take a military career or embrace this sort of thing, we believe it's more of a responsibility either of the individual, and we believe that the older you get, the more consent you are able to give. It's proportional. It's like you just learn more and understand more about the world. And the second thing is, if there's someone to guide you, if we accept the concept of guidance, probably that's going to be the parents, because they were the ones that grew you, that facilitated your opportunities, and who wants your best particular future and well-being, rather than the state who doesn't see differences between individuals. That requires agency. The older we get that agency, the more we trust parents, again, because they, generally speaking, love their kids. They can offer the guidance. By the way, if the parent they want to, they can still access the military services. This will probably happen in both worlds. If military services come to some sort of education or training or or whatever, probably if the parent wants to do that, they are still going to be able to access it. So this was the principal point. I'm going to take a POI from OO.
How exactly does militarization in US society look like for the average US citizen?
Look, there's so many other things happening beyond school, and I'm not going to cancel that statement, right? There's going to be Independence Day where you have a lot of military people walking around the streets. There's going to be flags of like military personnel flying around. So we believe that the delta is not that huge. It's the kids, right? And the fact that in those moments, when we bring those people in the school, we are idealizing the story of the army. We are creating an emotional bond that the kid will take with them forever. It's about love, appreciation, fear. These are the kind of emotional things that are being built so early in the process, which are hard to overcome and oftentimes irreversible and pushes people into embracing a military career. The other thing they do not display a complete story of whatever they have done. Probably they're going to over glorify the fact that the US Army solved an entire village without talking about the drones that have been constantly terrorizing entire villages and so on and so forth. Probably they're going to talk about how they saved their comrades by jumping on top of a bomb that was throwing shrapnels and they got mutilated, without talking about the thousands of military contractors that were left behind, part of the Afghanistan reason. So the problem is that you get deceived into thinking that military is this good actor that requires gratitude and appreciation. What this generally means, besides you risking the fact that to become a military, you also are more prone to support the military activity in the society. What this means is that we are more prone to support it as a political actor, to support the funding. Bear in mind, the US at the moment funds 25% of its national budget towards the army. What this means, it makes institutions representing the army a lot more powerful in society, like CIA, like the US Army. What this means is that they are the tipping point and are the negotiating power, and they have a lot of things to say whenever US Army has to respond to any sort of international thing. For example, when there was the threat of 9/11 and the war started in Afghanistan, because there was so much power and respect for the military. If we are able to tone down a bit, probably are going to have less war caused by impulsive moments where military has so much to say, and we move the conversation in democratic concept. For all of these reasons, OG.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that fine speech and now introduce the leader of opposition. Hear, hear.
Am I audible? Okay, I'm gonna assume I am.
Yeah, you're good.
3, 2, 1. So Dragos tells us that the military then becomes like much more powerful in the country as it was before because it gets leverage, but never tells us why is this a bad thing. Here's the thing: military is literally tasked with like protecting the state and protecting the integrity of the country and stuff like that. So we would probably assume that it's much more intuitive to say that military has the best interest of the state. So having it in the power is probably not the worst thing to have. And and I feel like what we're gonna say on the opening opposition is like this. I feel like when military like generals go to the schools to share the stories of like their war stories and like celebratory of army and stuff like that, but I don't think this is the only thing that they're able to do. I think that they also are able to like organize some sort of sporting events because like sports are like super important and being physically fit is super important for military. I think it's they can organize some sort of excursions to some sort of military sites to talk to discuss about history and stuff like that. These are the things that they're still able to do, and also in multiple vacations they talked about the educational system being there. So this is within the debate. But I don't think that this is automatically means, and what we say is like, yeah, some of these people are going to get like recruited by the military, but it doesn't mean, and this is where it becomes comparative on Dragos' point about like death, how like you gonna go into war and you're gonna die because like you are at the wartime and you are given a gun that you're gonna have to shoot somebody. Because here's the thing: just because you're in military, it does not mean that you're going to end up in the active warfare where you're gonna have to shoot people and that you're going to end up with the guns. When it comes to military, there's so much jobs to do and you require so much manpower to do that like it's just like that the military warfare and fighting itself is a very like minor part of this. What do I mean by this? And let me give you more concrete examples. For example, like food redistribution. What you need to do is to make sure you need the different people that are going to be ordering enough food in order to feed like the military people they need to be strong, they need to get bulky and stuff like that in order to be physically fit. You need to order all of that food. You need to make sure that all that food is going to be end up in, for example, US Navy or US submarine or something like that. You're going to have to make sure that there are people there that are able to prepare that food, that are people that are going to be able to preserve that food, that there are people that are going to be able to like redistribute that food more effectively to the military like soldiers and stuff like that. There is a lot of things to do. What does this prove to you, panel, is that in terms of logistics, not also you need engineers, probably medical workers, stuff like that. When you are a soldier and when you work in the military, it doesn't automatically mean that you're going to go in Afghanistan and you're going to shoot innocent people. But second thing is that the drone wars is becoming much more like, much more common in the society. It becomes much more popular in terms of like when the drones are like when no people are getting involved. But also, even you don't buy any of that, panel, in terms of, because Dragos' assumption is basically that like the freedom is like the most the life is the best thing that we ought to be care about and stuff like that. But this is not necessarily true, because even the soldiers, the way that they're going to be talking about it, or like or the way that it is that even in the military warfare, what happens is that the soldiers are willing to sacrifice their life for freedom and for the integrity of their country. It's knowing that life is by losing life you lose everything. This means that the freedom of your individual is something that you value more than even your life. So this is the thing. But so yeah, I want to talk about more what exactly are going to be those schools, what are going to be the people that we're going to be reaching out to, and what are the people that we're going to be recruiting, and why that's probably a good thing. I think that the military that are the type of schools that they're going to go to is most likely to be like schools of underprivileged people and people and public schools. Why is this the case? 3 points here. Number one, because those public schools in the US, they probably don't have just as much funding to be able to afford such excursions or such entertainment industries, such entertainment for those kids. So they would rather go to like invite like military personnel to talk about those things, and the military personnel would be able to do that or like would be interested in doing that because they're interested in expanding their circle of people and getting more recruits. And they realize that they would get much more it would be much more easier for them to achieve that if it is in the school that is like a bit more underprivileged. Second thing is, like, when it comes to private schools, they have like rich parents that are able to like to cover their kids, and they're able to like give them certain financial funding and stuff like that. Because why is this and here is the thing, because in terms of what does it look like for those kids to be in those schools? They're like quite unprivileged in terms of like maybe they're part of the racial minority, maybe they're part of ethnical minority, maybe they're discriminated against. It's going to be more importantly impacting. But this also means that they don't have much of like opportunities because of the society and the financial situation that they were born in, and they probably don't have access to the information that they would otherwise have. But also this probably means that they don't have as much like guidance that like Dragos talks about, because like it literally doesn't happen in the status quo. When you have public schools, you have one teacher for like 100 students or something, like, okay, not 100 students, but like it's like this, it's one teacher for like many students. You're not going to be able to guide every single student. What usually happens is that like teachers pick out one student that is like more or less like capable and like kind of drag the student up. And I think by military being there, they're kind of like equal, making, and especially this becomes much more like they become much more less off compared to people in private schools, because like they have the money for that. They have the money to give those kids good childhood and stuff like that. POI from closing, please.
Especially when you talk with unprivileged kids, they think short-termistic, and life right now seems very hard. This means that they cannot resist the army's influence.
No, but this is the thing that I'm talking about. For example, they might know they might not have certain access to certain information, such as if you are a military recruit, then military is going to be able to literally fund your university education if you do some military service, stuff like that. They don't have this sort of information. They would think that you would have to pay. Why is it the case that we're going to do this in schools? Because number one, when you are going to school, this is when you start having conversation about like what are you going to do when your life is going to become, what are you going to get a job? Are you going to go to college, or are you going to be a dropout or something like that? If this is going to become a college, then college students, this is not as like is not the best thing, because like because like then you already spent a bunch of money on like your tuition fee and stuff like that, meaning that you lost about a lot of like crucial time that you could have spent like getting your job. Also, this gives you a stable job in terms of like you're able to finance yourself. But this means that impacting, number one, life quality of those underprivileged people is becoming better, but also the society is treating them better, especially because like they are becoming because like the military generals, if they wear the uniform, they have higher standing in society. This means if you're a racial minority, you're being more respected, meaning that it becomes more better for you as a racial minority. Further in Alex's speech, proud to oppose.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that fine speech, and now introduce the Deputy Prime Minister. Hear, hear.
Just give me 1 second. So I'm gonna take POIs in the chat, and if you want to just turn up your camera and just wave when you have a POI, that's also fine. Okay. I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Precisely because the army is purposely going into poor neighborhoods and public schools to propagate and manipulate more people, that exactly is the problem, right? We have an active push from the American government to recruit these people, right? Because the purpose of the army in this situation is to have more future recruits. And we are telling you that the main issue with that is that these recruits, these possible future recruits, are unable to consent, right? And are basically having their whole life decisions based on something that they were manipulated into, and we do not think that that is how it's supposed to go, right? They talked about sports and military events and how they are going and offering a chance to poor privileged areas. We are telling you that specifically that is the problem, right? The U.S. Army is having multiple layers of approaching this in a shadowy way. You have PC games, you have just online games that are having a secret a lower button that says you can join the army here, right? You also have this sweet talk of this is your only chance of salvation. The problem with that is that you are talking to kids. Everything that the opposition is saying or might say is okay and can be done, but please do not subject this to kids that are not able to fully consent. Because the problem with kids, and this has been zero interaction with from what Dragos has said, is that you are basically growing and teaching these kids to be normalized around the army narrative that makes them more likely to be okay with it, even if otherwise they might not have consented into this. Let's discuss a little bit why they're not able to consent. And yeah, they're minors, right? They do not have their brain properly yet fully developed in order for them to have the full decision. We do not let them drink. We do not let them do other things. In other countries where the military service is mandatory, even in those countries, we have it after you are already of age, right? We are telling you that specifically because we do understand that you need your full capacity of cognition in order to opt in that kind of activity. Second of all, we are telling you that, and Dragos has already, I'm not going to take you yet, has already explained it, how this army narratives are likely to be glorified. They're not going to be objective. They're going to present the best part of the situation because they're actually there as salesperson. They're there to sell you the product of army, and that implies hiding the bad part of it. So even if you were fully developed and fully conscious, you cannot take a proper decision without understanding both of the situation. We blame, and we as a society put labels on products that inform us about calories or stuff that might be bad for us, precisely because we want the consumers to have the full information in order to have an informed consent. This is why this is something that does not happen. A third layer, which is very important, is that school is an authority, right? And whoever comes into school or brings us to stuff to school, they're important people, and we look at them as an authority, that we're paying respect to them. We think that they're important people, and you're associating that as a kid with the job of being part of the military, right? We are telling you that that is a problem precisely because army does require another layer of consent. Anton has spent a lot of time explaining us how there are multiple jobs within the army. You don't necessarily need to have the pull the trigger job, but we are telling you that specifically what is specific to army is the fact that you are going into that war, in a possible war. It implies a possibility of that consent, of putting your life behind the country's needs. And that is a specific decision that you need to be able to take with your full cognition when you are of age, when you are over 18, when you have the full information. That is something that if you lose, you cannot, it's a decision that cannot be reversed. It's not similar to being a doctor, which you can opt out at some point, right? It's a decision so fundamental that you have to consider when you are joining the army. You realize that you are putting your life in danger, even if you're just moving food in a camp, right? I'm going to take the POI from CEO, please.
Okay, so how is this different from any other career path a seminar talks? For example, a doctor coming into my school and talking about life in hospital and how this is a potential career path for me.
A doctor in a school does not put my life in danger, and it's has the reverse possibility, right? I can opt out from the doctor. I can be exposed to all these options because they do not mean that they affect my fundamental views of life, right? This is why we do not have politics in schools, because we want the people to make their own decision to something that is so close to my heart. If I want to protect my country, that is a decision that I have to take with myself when I'm alone. And if I want to trade my life in a possibility for my country, that is something that needs to be decided by myself. Same with religion, right? We give kids the possibility to have their own full decision on that, right? Helping and funding the poor communities. I think that is not the way in which the government should interact with that by sending the army, right? You should have other safety nets. You should provide help to those people in other ways rather than manipulating them to join the army. We think that is extremely problematic from a moral standpoint of view to go and pick the people from the poor background to protect their country, precisely because they're not able to fully understand the situation and to fully consent on what they're going to. Because even if you're not going to die, the possibility that you already made that decision in the first place, that you cannot consent into that in the first place, is the problem. And this is what we are standing for. You can have this whole propaganda from after they're 18, that's fine, but not when they're kids. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that fine speech and introduce the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
Hiya, I will just ask for a POI probably at around 5 minutes. You don't need to ask or interrupt me or write it in the chat. With that being said, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I have 2 main responses to opening government, and this also conflates slightly with rebuttal, or pre-buttal rather, to closing government and what I believe they will bring. First of all, what does consent look like? If I am taught something, if I am shown something, if I see something, does that mean it has violated my consent? I don't necessarily think so, because under this logic, it is also then immoral and irrational and probably even harmful to teach kids about sex education education, because when we teach kids sex education when they're 12 years old, we don't expect them to start fucking at 12 years old. We expect to inform them for future relationships and situations that they're going to be in. Exactly the same as history and politics and religious education, which maybe it's different in your home country, but in America, at least, you have AP classes for all these subjects, which means it is being taught in schools, which means children are exposed to horrific things like genocide, violence, and also understanding their own political system, also understanding different religions. Well, I don't know, it's America, to be honest, who the fuck knows? But at the same time, we still teach children these things, because we do not just say, oh, your brain hasn't like developed onto like some kind of biological standard and therefore you will not be able to handle it. No, we kind of like fully accept that like people from 10 to 12, like starting from 10 to 12 can probably already start taking in this information, start to like realize the impacts it has, start thinking like not just selfishly and like, oh, I'm the only one that matters, but their brain develops to a point where they can start thinking about abstract ideas and not necessarily take it in. We also let children play violent video games, but this doesn't mean that every children turns into a shooter. I think at some point they are able to conflate the difference and they're able to make rational decisions despite their influence around them. But I digress. Our case also rests on the fact that we are going to be effective recruiters, and we are going to do this to communities where we know we are going to be able to get the most people into the military. Here's one simple reason why this is. People with future prospects do not join the military. This goes two ways. This means that we don't recruit usually at rich schools, and this also, like we don't recruit people who already have career plans and already have the capital to potentially fail, or at least to even take the opportunity in the first place, because let's remember, we're talking about America here. Any kind of further education, which is necessary now to get any job that isn't just a service level job, because of how much degree saturation there is, because a company doesn't want to hire anyone that doesn't have like at least a bachelor's at this point. At this point, you are almost forced to go into college, and even if you go to community college, this is so incredibly expensive that unless your family has any significant financial means, or you are able to take on a lot of debt for the rest of life, you are unable to access in the first place, or you simply do not want to access because you may just be in an impoverished community, and maybe something like education seems absolutely useless to you because you see yourself as someone who just like never can achieve these things. Because remember, again, you're in public school, you're in the most impoverished schools, and that's where they were going to be campaigning and making sure these children have this. I think also of note is what closing government says in the POI, in that it's irresistible to children, and that it's very, very good to children. I think to the children this will be irresistible to. I think to the children who then grow up to be 16, 18 and start like actively thinking about whether they want to get enrolled in the army, because I also want to note that I'm not sure why it's like pointed out in opening government as if like we're enrolling children into the army. We're not. You're of legal age to, you have to be of legal age to join the army or to do any kind of military service. It is irresistible to children, but the alternative is oftentimes, especially in these communities, that if you don't have any prospects, you drop out of school, you go and join your local gang, you stay at your mother's place, and you feel like the only thing that you're good for is service jobs, because as Anton pointed out, the teachers in your school are unlikely to be the caretakers and motivators and encouragers that tell you, hey, you actually could have a future, you have potential. Oftentimes you are forced to sit through slogs of standardized testing, being told that you're not good enough if you like don't have a specific number of things, and you just simply feel like you cannot relate to this as an average person. There are many, many ways why individuals in impoverished communities may feel like they have no future prospect. What does the army offer them? Like Anton says, probably not a job in active combat. You do not lay your life down in a lot of these things. Oftentimes you are logistics managers, oftentimes you are pilots, oftentimes you are just transport trucks. Do you know how many transport delivery trucks you need for just the Austrian fucking army in America? Probably with the land service that they have and the places that they go, they probably need 10 times more. There are so many jobs to be filled, and they have not only the guarantee of healthcare, they not only have the guarantee of a free college education if you wish to pursue, they not only have very, very good career options where if you want to get a respected title like general, colonel, whatever, you are very, very free to. You can go study for free and then get that title, make your family proud. Do like when you go out in society and you have your military ID and you like maybe wear your beret or your dog tags or something that indicates you're part of the military, you get a respect that probably as a person of color, or probably as a person who's just from a very impoverished community and like from a family with no like financial means or financial background, you gain a lot more respect than you otherwise would. You feel better about yourselves. And second thing that we think that the military necessarily does effectively by going to schools is that they give poor children similar experience that rich children have. They fund and facilitate field trips. They fund and facilitate sports days and outings. They don't necessarily always have veterans in schools because this is boring. The U.S. Army wants to have a personal connection with you and let you know that as a child that they are someone who was there for you. They are someone who's providing opportunity for you. They do this in giving you unique experience that nobody else can. You, therefore, as a poor child in this impoverished area, therefore have experience more similar to rich people, where otherwise you would be excluded from these experiences simply because of the fact that you were randomly born into a family that didn't have the financial need to have them. What does a world without this U.S. Army in schools look like? We think what this looks like is children that is simply just not knowing what is available to them. We think that they're far less effective at recruiting people who otherwise have no options in life. If they just recruit at universities or places that they believe children were, which is actually hard because we don't have things like malls anymore, we think that it will be far less effective at the point where they have already decided what they want to do in the future, or they've already given up at their prospects of the future because they don't see anything for them. Before I go on closing,
if we have people that are in potential to get into crime, we're not sure why would we want them in the army in the first place. They probably have no self.
I think U.S. Army generals are smart enough to realize that the criminal justice system is oftentimes bullshit, and these are people with potential who were just in a bad place at a bad time and were convinced by the wrong people. Instead of convince them to do crime, like there is no inherent, they're not stupid. They know that there is no inherent biological indicator that makes you a criminal or not a criminal. They know that if they put you on the right path, you will, instead of like following the orders from a gang leader or like someone who's your friend who's selling drugs, you will follow orders for them, and therefore that means that they are able to capitalize on that and actually put you on the right path and also feel like they are doing good, and therefore they'll like makes the recruiting effort a lot more effective. Anyway, the second problem that I had with government's cases as a whole is how like this perception of demilitarization. I'm not exactly sure what demilitarization exactly means, because I'm not exactly sure how the society in the US is militarized. I think oftentimes people are just very average. They go about the average day, they do average things, and they don't necessarily think about wars or the military or what they're doing. You are not going to end harmful US intervention at the point that you don't recruit people from schools anymore. Recruitment won't be lower, but the US will still do shitty things. At this point, we say that at least we can get impoverished people, oftentimes on the path, and knowing like what they actually have future available to them, knowing that they that someone probably believes in them and like visits their schools and talks to them and gives them opportunities, and this probably wouldn't have also like stopped 9/11, as I think Dragos was trying to conflate. But with all that said, we are incredibly proud to oppose.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that fine speech and introduce the member of government. Here.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm starting in 3, 2, 1. I'll explain why in our world we will get better conditions in military for poor people, and if I will have time, I will explain why in the current status quo we have over militarization of the military. So I'm starting my point about better conditions. Now we think that now the military think that the poor people are inside his pocket. They will get militarized no matter what. We agree that now that we think that now the conditions are just okay. They can go higher, but they are not so bad. But they can go higher. But the military don't make them higher because he knows that the poor people will get militarized anyway. Why the poor people get militarized anyway? First, we talk about very poor neighborhood. That when you live in a poor neighborhood and the life around you is so hard, and now you have like an angel military that comes to your school and gives you money and helps you with education, this makes the military seem like an angel for you, like a very good person. So you cannot criticize it. This is the first reason. The second reason, we talk about neighborhoods that is very bad for them to see alternatives. That is, they get less often. They hear less often about the universities and other job offers, and they get less political. They hear less political agenda from other parties because less people want to go to these places, and agree with us on this. This is the second reason. But the third reason is that when you as a child see a military that looks so cool to to you, they promise to you that your future is promised in their side, and so on, you think to yourself, I can, this is my future. I should not put much of effort into learning and education because I have another alternative. This especially work on poor people, because poor people find it already hard to study because they have other things they have to do in the rest of their life. They had other problems in their life. Also, the schools themselves in their sometimes they find it hard to integrate into school and so on. So when you have another thing in your head that says you don't have to put much effort into education because you have the option of military, you start investing less in education. And this is an irreversible harm, because after many years you cannot simply learn the things you missed from the class. What this does in the debate: first, we prove the burden of OG better than them, because we explain to you why this is actually irreversible impact. Like OG only talked about kids. We explained to you why the fact that they are poor makes this impact is so big. But this also answers why this is true, because we know that we should say that in the next war the military will raise the conditions for these people to try to attract them. Well, now why this is true? First, note that we still have lectures, and we still have lectures in our world about the army, but we don't give them to children. We give them in high school, in high school or in after high school. Therefore, we give these lectures to children when they have more ability to criticize, when we are in the stage of getting exposed to other areas. This is so they will start thinking about in terms of money, and not only in terms of I want to save my country, I want to be cool. This will make the negotiation between the army and these communities harder, and the army will have to raise the conditions. This is the first. But two, we think that in the new world, the army will also start to getting rich people inside. Like now, the portion of rich people is much lower than the portion of poor people. In the new world, when the army cannot focus all of its agenda only on poor people, it will start attracting also on rich people, because it does have to attract people to serve in military. Then therefore, we'll get people who have more negotiation and more ties in politics. They have more, the politicians are more give more account to their votes, because they have more time to be politically active. They have more ability to unite. They have more impact and so on. And when also rich people enter into the army, they will have more political agenda to raise conditions in the army. Not that still most of the people will be poor inside the army, but it's enough that we get 20% people that are rich inside the army. Then they will also raise the conditions for poor people. Before I continue,
why can't the army just do this as well? Like, why is it necessary to ban them from schools in order for any of this to happen?
Note, the army wants to spend as less money as possible. He wants to save the money for other things. If he knows that these people are going to get inside the army no matter what, then he does not have any incentive to raise money. But in our world, he does have incentive to raise money because he is afraid from losing these people. Now, how this weighs over OO? Like OO say that we help people, poor people, because we give them better education and so on. First, I already explained to you why this brings to worse education, because the people think that they have a worse future in army. But two, we are affecting you in more time in your future. Like, imagine that you have $2,000 more dollars in your salary for 20 years or for 30 years. This is much more important than 10 years during your school. But more than that, because when you are a child, you have less ability for criticism. The ways that the army invests in schools is usually in simple ways, like giving them some lectures, or investing a little in one building and so on, because it's easy for children to get attracted. But once you want to attract a grown-up person, it's harder to negotiate against him, and therefore the salary you will offer him and the investment you will give him is much greater. What this means, we are talking about people getting more salary in the time that they must need this, in the time where they might get loans, and they might get they want to end the minus in their bank account. In the time we have to have a family, they have to have a family, they have to pay for rent. It's much important to have better condition in this times of your life than to have slightly better condition when you are when you are kid during school. So the kind of investment in our world is much more important than the kind of investment that you get in your world. And because I proved the OG impact of forcing and less consent better than them, and because I proved that we get more investment in our side, we are above OO and OG.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that fine speech, and now introduce the member of opposition. Here.
Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. First, in my framing, I will prove to you why recruitment will happen on either side of the house, but more pernicious on government side. Secondly, I'll talk about the principle of choice and directly clashes with the consent point coming from OG. Lastly, I'll talk about how joining the military is possibly one of the best jobs in capitalism right now. Okay, first I'm framing then. Recruitment will happen either way, but why is it bad on government side? Importantly, the army wants to recruit children on both sides. They're not going to stop just because it's banned from school, because anywhere else it's not banned. I will prove why this is symmetric and why this is good in the worst case scenario. And the note here is that there are a way broader spectrum of means in which military can drain children with pro-military content, but with no check and balances. This first looks like social media, in which it is necessary that a lot of youth use. Sure, you can target more audiences because social media has non-youth population, but there are literally, like, for example, youth communities on Reddit, like the teenager sub, and these are all ways in which you can brand yourself as informing children about the military and drain them with pro-military propaganda. And I say that this is very likely because the US will definitely do this, given that they love military and spend billions and billions of dollars on the military every year. So there's a huge political incentive to push the military to do this thing. Why is this far worse on their side with no check and balances on social media? When there's no checks against how military spread their propaganda, and there's no adult, for example, in the teenager sub, presumably that they're not pedophiles, given that the youth don't know how the military works, they will probably listen so blindly to just the military who are telling them how they work and how, like, extremely poisonous and the narrative that they're likely to sell. Know that US military is the only actor that is interested and have time to do such propaganda spreading. There's unlikely to be any similar actors that are likely to counter this with the same interest as hardcore as US military. The comparative on our side of the house, which is far better, is in a school environment where teachers are generally not pro-war and are generally just against military, meaning that if the army do lie to you in a seminar that they gave you, the teacher will probably tell you that it is not completely correct in the person what is telling you, right? This is the only way that you can have a balanced calculus about whether army is a good choice for you, where you know both sides of the story. Importantly, I think maybe glorification will still exist on our side of the house, but it is not coercive, but rather it is simply a balancing of narrative. This is because people you interact with every day, like parents and teachers, are unlikely to support you to join the army. That is why consent doesn't exist on their side of the house when there's an asymmetry of information presented to students. So students usually are fundamentally denied to join military as a viable career path, and we're rather just balancing the social narrative. And this quite fitly leads to my first argument, which is on the principle of choice. I think that students should be open to all options that they have in terms of career. Panel, I urge you to think about how millions of children on their side of the house will grow up that might have a real passion in serving in the army, helping out people in society, and trying to fight off the villains in society and make our community safer. I think this is something a lot of people choose to opt into because there's a huge pride and happiness just from the act of helping other people and seeing other people prosper and reciprocating the appreciation back. Humans instinctively love these feelings really, really much. How does Gov fundamentally deny these people the chance of joining military? First, there's a huge stigma around just joining military for children. Parents are risk averse, so they never want their kids to join the army. So it is government side that has no consent. You coerce children with only one side of the story. Secondly, movies tend to portray the most brutal and violent moments of warfare because those are what gets the most views and enjoyment from audiences. But those are very exaggerated and false depiction of what the roles of most soldiers actually are. OG responds to my POI by saying that I need to think about this choice in the dark by myself because this links to my life. But the problem is that on Goff's side of the house, the choice is very coercive because of the societal endogenous norms that are only existing in our parents and teachers. The impact of this argument is that I think our side maximizes the preferential choice of children. This means on the spectrum of happiness, millions of children will be happier because they chose the right career path on a balance of information, and millions of children might not choose the army, would they have chosen on government side and be unhappy about it because of a lack of information. Next, I want to give more individual responses to the consent point. I think that consent in the future just doesn't make any sense, right? Because serving in army is just like a career like everything else. It isn't something that is so abhorrent to human conditions that no kids understand. So we fundamentally deny the premise that kids are not mature enough to understand it, right? We think that the analogy to drinks is fundamentally doesn't work because drinks are something that prevented from children because they're really bad for children physically, right? How I want to respond to the consent on OG is that consent is only meaningful when you're in high school and college, when you're on campus, and when you're making a career choice. Why is that the case? First, people already determine their career graduating high school, right? And only a small percentage of people actually shift their career after college and when they're in campus, right? So any choice based off of a more mature mind is meaningless. But I also think that high schoolers and university students are not brainless and can obviously make up their mind about what they believe to be the most suited career they want to pursue as a high schooler going into the future. Secondly, I think that without the army actually going into the school and telling you what actually working in the army looks like, it is not something that your parents are trying to tell you or the films are trying to tell you. You'll probably live in an echo chamber on their side of the house where people around you are most likely to be not pro-military. Most parents don't want to send their kids to the military. So it is likely that you carry into adulthood the narrative that military is fundamentally not something that you should opt into, right? Unless you're genuinely passionate about it and resist all of the social factors that we have talked about, which we don't believe to be a really free choice anyway. The second argument that I have is that army is a really, really good career path. And I think the second argument responds to the Gulf push that DPM dropped about how US will send soldiers to Afghanistan. But I want to note that this is not a defensive argument. This is an offensive argument. I'm going to outline a bunch of mechanisms for why military is a great place. The premise of this argument is that US is more and more isolationist. They're pulling out of Afghanistan, Iraq, and everywhere else. This is because there's a huge per cost capital for sending soldiers overseas if you're invading a country, or the threat of there are way better means of international conflicts, like OSA, like for example, drone strike or economic sanction, or the threat of nuclear weapon. All of these means that soldiers will in the future never engage in international conflicts, but probably some domestic policing and safeguarding. And you still need a military to deter other countries from invading yourself, right? This means that soldiers will never live in a violent environment. Why serving in the military is great then? There's a host of benefits associated with the military that wasn't given in our background. First, they get healthcare, they get therapy, they receive comprehensive health coverage under the U.S. system of TRICARE, right? There's allowance for food and housing and all other expenses. And also after completing their service, veterans may be eligible for a bunch of other benefits like disability compensation, vocational rehabilitation, access to veterans hospital, and healthcare services that are not existing on their side of the house. It has a big opportunities for promotion too because of the numerous ranks in army, for example, an Amazon company, right? All of these means that structurally, if you choose to go into this path, it would be really, really great for you under capitalist system. On the basis of that, very proud to oppose.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that fine speech and introduce the government whip. Here.
Okay, thank you. If any of you wants to keep your cameras open, it will be really nice, much nicer than talking to black squares. Great, thank you. All right, starting in 3, 2, 1. Firstly, rebuttal to CEO about the point that, the army will now produce propaganda so the kids will get into the army. Firstly, completely symmetric, happens today anyway. We don't understand why it changes. Secondly, oh my God, this is a policy motion, right? If we don't want the army to produce propaganda in schools, it is most probably that the Congress won't allow it also to be targeted to children via social media and things like that. We just don't think this is a debate or that this is a very charitable definition by CO. Thirdly, we think that propaganda is happening on both sides, but notice why schools are unique. When you come into school, you see the veteran, he talks to you, you think this is accepted by both parents and teachers, and so you as a child think that this is something that is certified, you believe him. We think that when you see propaganda on your social media, you say, oh no, this is fake news, like many other things I see on my TikTok or Facebook, right? Children can be critic for things like that because they know many things are fake news. But thirdly, fourthly, we just don't think that kids see army ads, right? We think that when you go to TikTok, you see cooking videos, you see things about influencers, right? We think this is an extremely unlikely characterization of children, already mitigating the first case completely. Secondly, oh, propaganda in class is great in comparison to movies. No, we don't think this is great. We think when you see the soldier from first hand being very militaristic, talking about his experiences, you cannot escape. You cannot question because it will seem rude. On the comparative, when it is movies, you know that this is very heavily edited. You know that you can be critical, and most certainly, if you see that with other people, they will be critical, while in front of the soldier, it is very rude, and so we think you will be less critical when it is in your face when you see the veteran itself. But thirdly, oh, parents don't want their child to go to the army. Bullshit. Here his third argument. The third argument is that the parents have every incentive to get the child into the army because of healthcare, because of therapy, because of promotion, right? He's just stabbing himself. We think that parents have an incentive for the child go into the army. We don't think this is likely what he said. At this point, we think CO is out of this debate. They have very nice EPL accent, but they don't say much. Okay, let's go to this whole case about consent. Okay, so we think that OG comes and say, oh, let's militarism. School wants to open for you opportunities. What do we think is the problem with this whole very weird clash? That it is completely not comparative because firstly, we think you have many different things that schools impose on you. For example, they say how education is very important. They impose on you to think that universities are good. Universities can risk your life. If you are too anxious, for example, because of a university, if you get depressed. So what is the line? What is the criteria here? We don't think they have a criteria. But the second problem with this whole clash is that there are other values that are more important for us than consent. We think that, for example, protecting the country is more important. I'm from Israel. I don't get asked. Like, I am recruited. This is imposed on me. This means that I see that it is more important to protect Israel than to have a free choice, and I accept that. So we think this whole clash about consent is less important than other things in this debate, and here we think this is just a thing that doesn't really matter. What does Ramy gives to you? And we think this is the most important thing in this debate. Firstly, he tells you about how when you are exposed to the army from a very young age, you think of the army as the best career opportunity for you, and then you don't do other things that you can do as a student. So you think about the army as some place that will accept you, that will take you no matter what, and then you don't study that hard because you know you are aiming for the army, and then you're closing opportunities for you. Here, Ramy gives you the most nuanced analysis here about what actually affects students when they see this as a very valid career opportunity, and shows you a much more tangible impact than consent. Okay. Secondly, how there are no different narratives, meaning that the army knows that they can attract poor population if they want, meaning that their conditions would be much worse. Why is this important? Notice, one additional $1,000 for you in the salary might not be very important, might not seem very important because we are all privileged debaters, but as a very poor children from Texas that goes to the army, and this $1,000 are the difference between sending his sister to a better school or for a worse school. This is a huge amount of money. Ramy talks to you about when the army knows that they have no bargaining power over the soldiers, they are giving them more conditions. When they are more strong population, they are requiring more conditions, meaning that you get much more salary, you get much more things like healthcare, things like that, and so your material life becomes much worse. Much better. We think this is already the only tangible thing that was in this debate. Only on that we have to win. But let's also compare. We think that in comparison to OO's case about, oh no, we are losing recruiters, I will mitigate that heavily. But secondly, we just think that once we actually recruit poor people, it matters what are their conditions. And so we are logically prior to OO on this point. Okay, before I continue, let's take a POI from OO.
So yeah, your partner says that the only reason that the army should be banned from schools is because they need like more cost-effective measures to recruit rich people. I don't really get this, and I also don't get this at the point that every single time the army has asked for a budget increase, the US government has said yes, and this has led to the
We
trillion.
think that they have no incentive to promote more material conditions for soldiers because they know that they will come to them anyways. This is demand and supply. This is basic. Okay, let's go to mitigation. So about this, people are coming from a very poor background. They don't have knowledge about the army. Firstly, bullshit. They see people around them from the army. They know about this thing. Secondly, most of the time I'm not in school. I see ads. I see the movies. I know that the army exists and I know that I can get them. Thirdly, we can offer them that after they are graduates, after they are in secondary school. We're not sure why specifically primary and secondary school is the only point where they can know about those things. Secondly, about this point of, you will be to crime, you will be in crime life. Firstly, we're not sure why would we want people that are prone to crime. And then the second speaker of opposition tells us, we will rehabilitate them. I think you don't understand how army works. They don't want the people that are prone to crime, that have no self-discipline. They take the good people out of the poor neighborhoods, not the ones that can actually get into crime. And so the people that are at risk of crime are not important. What are important? All the people that now think, I will go to the army, I won't invest time in my studies, which is the main population that Ramy talks about. This is the tangible impact for them, much larger than the ones that are not getting into crime. This is why CG has to win this debate.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that fine speech and introduce the opposition whip.
Oops, I was muted. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. First, I'll do some rebuilding, and next, I'll just do some general weighing and then team by team. First, on rebuilding then, what do they say about our case? The first response they say is that all of the stuff about like social media campaign is symmetric, but I have give you a lot of preemption as to say why school is a unique actor that can preempts the sort of toxic narrative that is singularly sold to the students, right? That is to say, most teachers in school are not pro-military, meaning that when the military lies to them or just spreads complete bullshit propaganda, it means that the teachers can say that this is not completely correct. This means that the students get exposed to the both side of the story, meaning that this actually just preempts, sure, it is symmetric, but it is far better on our side of the house. The next thing that they try to refute our case is to say that students are going to say that this is fake news because students are extremely critical. The first is I think that students are not critical because they simply don't understand how the military works, right? Because they haven't exposed to such things. So even if they're like chemically and in the brain critical, they cannot actually access something that they have never learned before. That is why they need teachers to actually for them to guideline. But I think that there's a huge tension in their case if they give that response, which is to say, on the one hand, they say that children are going to be extremely critical. But on the other hand, they say that children will idolize military and because they help them and are never going to criticize them. I don't think how those things actually go in tandem. If you can spot fake news, I don't get why you cannot spot how the military is being hypocritical, right? The next thing that they try to say is that like they're gonna ban all form of like military like propaganda in every places. I think that is a huge burden that they're taking, and they don't have the fiat to do so, right? Because there's a huge capital for you to just ban all forms of freedom of speech of the military from anywhere else in society to say something that they believe to be informative of the public, to say how the military is worked. And also, I think that even on the not on the feasibility part, politicians simply has no incentive to ban free speech from everywhere else, even if you give them the fiat to do so in the spirit of the motion, right? Because politicians in anywhere else has huge incentive to side with the military. That is why they spend so many money into the military in the first place. And oftentimes these army on campus are oftentimes funded by politicians themselves. So there's no reason to believe that legislatures will pass anything similar to accomplish like the extended fiat that they try to claim on their side of the house. The next refutation that they give to our case is that parents truly want their kids to go to the military. This is not true because first, my framing about how the era is changing to more isolationism in terms of warfare means that your parents' perception is unlikely to be right and it's not shifted because of the era shift, right? And also I think that their refutation simply proves our case. They just prove why army on campus in the status quo isn't enough, and we should have more army in campus, right? Because parents don't know those healthier benefits. benefits clearly in that status quo, because most parents are not pushing their students, pushing their like kids into military, because also of the reasons of media and film pushing a narrative that is completely false and over exaggerated, right? Parents didn't interact with enough army people to know the real benefits of like going into the army. So to get parents to maybe stop stigmatizing about army as a job and the potentiality of your kids losing your life simply because you're risk averse, you should probably pursue our advocacy even stronger, right? But next, I think the response is that in the best case scenario, their response is extremely assertive in saying that parents, this is how they descriptively act, right? But I give you a structural reason for why parents don't act in this way. I told you why parents don't want their kids to die, and this is probably the single most important incentive, even though there are side benefits going into military, but without the understanding that parents don't know the modern warfare is no longer into the battlefields of going into Afghanistan, given all the trends that we have seen. And this is likely to continue in the future, because if you have nuclear bombs, why would you send soldiers into Afghanistan, right? Okay, I think that is enough for CG. Actually, I'll review more afterwards. But first, I want to do on weighing, right? I think that OO try to claim their benefits in a far-fetched way. Police sure will have their programs in schools, but it's not going to be like a semester-long programs that is going to be extremely intense and getting students to do all of the benefits that they try to gain. Given that there are so many schools in US and they generally have and generally the incentive from the military is to spread as much military propaganda, how military functions, to all kinds of schools across the country, because this is literally their initial goal. This is why they're gonna do displays in each of the place, all kinds of schools in the US, meaning that each individual school will probably just have like 3 talks in a semester, not gonna be an intense training camps or something like that. Also, like police can't just be in a school for such a long time to just give students a huge level of fulfillment or try to claim. Like it is extremely unlikely. I don't know why they have the capital to do so when they have probably greater duties to like protect the country or something like that, right? The problem is that military won't do much per my analysis, and this also kind of implicitly refutes like CG's case, because they're not going to spend so much time like publicly funding schools, right? But I think a more central response to CG's case is that private schools are not going to be funded by military, right? Given that, first of all, they're probably rich people in there, but also they're donated by big donors from rich families. And also, I think that it's extremely dumb for like a public school to be donated by a state institution, given that the public school is literally funded by a state anyway. So I don't get why people will actually love them, given that it is literally just like the state pouring money into like the state institution. That is extremely weird, right? But I think a secondary level problem about CG is that I think all of the time we criticize people who donate money to society, right? Because we criticize Jeff Bezos and all of the billionaires when they try to donate money to society, because I think that if the army still acts in a visibly public bad faith, just like all of the billionaires, they will still be criticized, because it is just complete hypocrisy, right? And they will probably be criticized even further, because hypocrisy, people just generally dislike hypocrisy even more and than just pure like you're just consistently acting in a bad way, right? When you're whitewashing, constantly trying to whitewash your misconduct in the past, you'll probably be criticized in a further fashion, right? And people are going to point the hypocrisy out, and this is how this generally spreads on social media too. And on the basis of that, very proud to oppose.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that fine speech, and thank everyone for what was a good debate as a whole. This is a closed round, I believe, so you guys can all just leave the meeting and chillax.
GG, guys.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone.
Thank you.